The story of Chris Kyle inspires a Hollywood blockbuster. The film American Sniper tells the tale of a near-legendary Navy SEAL. Set against the backdrop of the Iraq War, this real-life hero battles through 4 tours of duty, brings his demons home, but ultimately triumphs. But some claim this legend whitewashes Kyle's flaws. His accusers say he is a hate-filled killer, brutalised by the effects of war.
That's sort of the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about.
More disturbingly, others claim some of Kyle's stories aren't even true. That he's a fantasist, addicted to expanding his legend by telling lies.
It's hard to know sort of where shreds of truth were braided together in Chris's mind to create that story.
Just what is the real story behind the man known as the American Sniper? In December 2014, Hollywood's finest assemble for the premiere of American Sniper. Among the stars are actor and producer Bradley Cooper and director Clint Eastwood. The film is later nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars.
It was the top-grossing film in 2014. It's the highest-grossing war movie ever made.
The movie is based on the best-selling autobiography of Chris Kyle. A former Navy SEAL, his heroism under fire knew no limits.
He has 4 tours, he has 2 silver stars, 5 bronze stars. It's an amazing resume.
What makes Kyle's war story so different from others is that it's not just based on his frontline experiences. It also deals with how he overcomes the traumas of war when he comes home.
It showed this valiant, dedicated, brutal warrior on the field of battle. But when he comes home, he's dealing with family issues. So it showed another battle, a deeper battle and another dimension to an elite soldier.
But the film ignites a series of controversies. His detractors argue the popular image of Chris Kyle, as seen in the movie, is not a true portrait. It's been sanitized beyond all recognition.
I mean, the movie erases all of Kyle's flaws. It definitely turns him into a hero by whitewashing the things that audiences might feel uncomfortable with. They didn't want to hear anybody question that Chris Kyle wasn't the perfect soldier, or really the perfect American.
Some critics claim that the real Chris Kyle was a heartless, psychopathic killer.
People say, like, if he did the things that he said he did, he's a madman, he's a lunatic, he's a serial killer.
And there's an even bigger accusation that some of Kyle's stories are pure fiction.
What you find is someone who is not living genuinely and trying to get people around them to see him as something else.
So what is the truth about Chris Kyle? To answer that question, you have to start with the one thing that is beyond doubt: his involvement in the war in Iraq. Operation Iraqi Freedom. The story starts in a city 220 miles southeast of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, Nasiriyah. In the early weeks of the campaign, American forces are battling to control its streets. Kyle is on patrol in support of a squad of Marines. He's an elite fighter, a Navy SEAL, a product of that unit's infamous training regime.
We call it the Captain America factory. Every guy that steps out of that meat grinder, and it is a meat grinder, is capable of immense acts of heroism and patriotism and teamwork. If you send 16 SEALs to do a job, you damn well better kill all 16 of them, because if only one guy is left, that job is going to get done.
In his book, American Sniper, Kyle's writing shows he is everything a Navy SEAL should be before going into combat.
I wanted to do what I'd been trained for. I wanted to defend my country, do my duty, and do my job.
Then Kyle is asked to do something that's unexpected. Despite his intensive SEAL training, he's given a role he's never been prepared for. He becomes his unit's sniper.
The thing that's unique and different than a typical combat kill is that you can view the kill from start to finish at an intimately close distance through a rifle scope. And you can see that bullet impact that target. You can see the blood pooling on the ground around them. It is like watching a Technicolor IMAX version of somebody's death.
As his Marines move forward, above them, Kyle identifies a potential threat.
Chris sees a woman who looks to be carrying something suspicious. So, you know, his senses are working overload. His brain is pulling in all this information, having to make this decision.
The novice sniper has to make a judgment call. The woman is approaching his Marines. Is she a suicide bomber, or is she innocent?
You know that if you shoot a woman who turns out to be unarmed, you could find yourself being up before a court for war crimes, but also you take too much time to take the decision, and then she then explodes herself and kills US Marines. You've got to live with that decision for the rest of your life. It's almost as if everything slows down, almost freezes.
Kyle has made the right call. His first sniper kill has saved the Marines' lives.
When you're a sniper, your brain makes the decision, and you do what you have to do. And I think the first time you do this, and every time subsequently, it changes you.
What Chris Kyle doesn't know yet is how big those changes will be. Two months later, Kyle returns stateside to a reunion with his wife, Taya. They have been married just over a year and have a close and loving relationship.
Taya is a very strong-willed woman. She's very driven and motivated, and most of all, understanding. But when the husbands come home, it's not always smooth. And it's that psychological adjustment that is the most difficult when you come home.
Taya senses her husband is on edge. He seems to be struggling more than he is admitting to. One night, while Kyle is sleeping, he grabs hold of her. Fearing that he will snap her arm, Taya struggles to pull free. She repeats his name until he finally comes to his senses. It is a sign that the war is psychologically scarring Kyle.
I think when you're out there in combat, you're operating at a very high level, you're hyper attuned to everything that's around you. And I think when you come back home, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to just snap out of that. Because you're still fighting the war.
The man that will become known as the American Sniper is beginning a journey that will take him to some very dark places. In November 2004, Kyle is on his second tour of duty. In the bloodiest American land battle since the Vietnam War. It's fought in a city 43 miles west of Baghdad, Fallujah.
We swept through the city from north to south, going door to door, house to house, looking for weapons caches and resistance fighters.
Chris Kyle is now fully trained as his unit's sniper. His job is to take up position on tall buildings and watch the backs of the Marines on the streets.
His responsibility was to protect these men, and he really had to perform. I mean, if he made the wrong decisions, then people could die. So there was a lot of responsibility on his shoulders.
In his writings, Kyle seems to be able to shrug off his huge burden.
I look through the scope, get my target in the crosshairs, and kill the enemy before he kills one of my people. I wondered how I would feel about killing someone. Now I know. It's no big deal.
But for all the bravado, killing so many people up close does start to affect him.
There's the living with that afterwards, and different soldiers had, different ways of dealing with it. Chris Kyle seemed to struggle with it more than he would have liked to let on.
At times it's very overwhelming. Like in your brain you're saying enough, enough, enough. The shots you've taken and what that person's face looked like when the bullet hit. And these are some of the things that you don't think about until afterwards, when the fight is over, when that particular battle is over, and you sit back and repose and you think about these things, those images flash through your brain.
Kyle starts to develop a coping mechanism. He dehumanizes those he kills. He writes about the Iraqis in brutal terms.
Savage, despicable, evil. That's what we were fighting in Iraq.
It's lines like these that lead critics to accuse Kyle of being racist.
The Iraqis are the other. They are not like him. They are savage. They are sort of subhuman.
Kyle's defenders say that this is what soldiers have to do to survive.
In order to rise above your opponent, to mentally dominate them, to physically dominate them, you have to denigrate them.
But some who also served in Fallujah are shocked by Kyle's attitudes.
There were a lot of people who criticized Chris Kyle for his very blatant racism and bigotry. No one should get away with that. It's not okay to say those kind of things, and people should not believe that that's what the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were about.
Kyle's views of his enemies become even stronger. He later boasts about the pleasure he takes in the job of killing them.
I loved what I did. I'm not lying or exaggerating to say that it was fun.
Killing took on a whole new meaning for him. He appears to be celebrating the act of killing or seeming to rejoice in the death of his enemies.
In April 2006, Kyle returns for his third tour of duty in the city of Ramadi. He's now facing not only Iraqi insurgents, but Islamic fundamentalist fighters that have flooded into the country. Among them, the notorious Al-Qaeda warlord Abu Musab al-Zarqawi.
He was certainly public enemy #1 for us, and we knew that we needed to take him out. Not only was he the leader of Al-Qaeda in that theater, but he was also their religious fortifier. He was the head of the snake.
The Jordanian al-Zarqawi has an appalling reputation for beheading Western captives and murdering thousands of innocent Iraqis through acts of terrorism. Fighting this Islamic extremism has a profound effect on Kyle. He starts to see himself as a modern-day crusader against Islam.
He does get the Crusader cross tattooed on his arm, which he does intentionally to send a message saying he's a Christian.
I had it put in red for blood. I hated the damn savages I'd been fighting. I always will.
There's the idea of the clash of civilizations. That strain of American Christianity believes in that. And so for Chris, that is, for him, a very real religious war.
But for all those that criticize Kyle, the men he fights with are thankful he's on their side. They even give him a nickname, and it will last. Chris Kyle becomes the legend.
Initially, the term legend was given to Chris as a joke. It was a inside of the platoon joke. They were razzing him, the other platoon mates. They're like, "Oh, dude, you're the legend."
The legend is so deadly that his enemies give him a different nickname, the Devil of Ramadi, and put a $20,000 price on his head. As his reputation grows, Kyle starts to see himself as his men's guardian angel.
So the legend became a good luck talisman. If you were kicking in a door as that young Marine down on the street, the legend was watching from up above, and he would save you, protect you from harm.
But the legend will soon discover that he cannot save everyone, including those closest to him. In 2006, Kyle is on his third tour of duty in Iraq when his unit move in to capture a building which will give the Americans a good view over the city. But they start taking casualties. As the fighting continues, one of Kyle's seals takes a hit. Killing him instantly.
It happened in Chris's platoon, and that was a burden that Chris had a very, very hard time bearing.
When the legend discovers that he cannot protect everyone, he is racked with guilt. In his book, he writes,
Why hadn't I been standing there? I could have saved my boy. I was in a dark hole, deep down. Nothing I'd ever experienced in Iraq had affected me like this.
"6 weeks later, Chris Kyle takes his guilt home with him. It should be a happy time. He and Taya now have a son and daughter. But despite these responsibilities, Chris feels he's in the wrong place. He should be back in Iraq, protecting his buddies.
The moment he got home from those combat tours, he was already thinking about his next deployment.
He felt his duty was sort of to God, country, and family in that order.
In fact, that guilt just drove him to accept one deployment after another, to the point where it almost ruined his family life back home.
Despite Taya's wish that he should stay, Kyle leaves his family once again for the battlefield. Kyle's fourth tour will almost cost him his life. On his first day on patrol, he's in the thick of the action on the outskirts of Baghdad. A bullet strikes his helmet.
Chris had the sensation of everything going black, of blood running down his face.
He thinks he's either dead or blind.
Not knowing if he's dead or alive, Kyle's team haul him out of the firing line. He's still breathing. When the shock wears off, Kyle realizes he's lucky to be alive. He may be a 4-tour veteran, but for the first time, Kyle is afraid of being killed.
He had 2 children, and so in his final tour, when he takes a shot to the head, that has a different meaning when you have children than when you don't. And he had more to lose.
The idea of being mortal had been something I could push away, but now it was practically all I could think of.
As his tour continues, Kyle's body starts to show signs of stress.
It was as if my body had started to vibrate. I was unable to eat or sleep.
He has the sweats and shakes, and there's a spike in his blood pressure, classic symptoms of combat stress.
A lot of these mental, psychological stressors manifested themselves outwardly in physical signs. That happens when you're trying to repress all this mental and emotional and physical drama that you've been through.
Realizing that Kyle's in deep trouble, his doctors decide to cut short his tour and send him home. In 2008, Kyle finds himself unexpectedly back home with his friends and family. But he's not happy. He's still desperate to renew his contract with the SEALs and fight alongside his buddies. For his wife Taya, it's the final straw. She issues an ultimatum. If he stays on, she and the kids are moving out.
She did the absolute right thing to save his life and to save her family, and I applaud her for that. And Chris listened.
Finally, Kyle accepts his responsibility to his family, overrides that to his unit. But leaving the SEALs is more difficult for Kyle than he thought. There's a gaping hole in his life.
What you truly miss is the day-to-day interaction with other guys who have been through exactly the same thing, from SEAL training all the way up to that present moment. There's a lot of things that go unspoken and unsaid, and those things are very comforting.
Kyle seeks escape in the way so many veterans do.
Pretty soon, drinking was all I did. After a while, it was hard liquor, and it was all through the day.
He seems to be spiraling out of control. He needs to turn his life around. It's now that Kyle does something truly admirable. Thousands of veterans return to America with mental and physical problems, and Kyle thinks he can help them. He sets up a charity called Fitco Cares that donates gym equipment to those that need support.
One of the ways Chris helped himself was to work with individual veterans and veterans groups. And what this did for him was it gave him a link back in with the community that he come from.
Working closely with others that have suffered on the battlefield helps him as much as it helps them.
Those one-on-one relationships, I think, was where he really blossomed and where he was most effective in helping these young men, and where he also kind of regained a sense of purpose.
And he finds another way of coping. With Taya's help, he begins writing his life story.
I think writing the book was part of Chris's healing process.
He was trying to make sense of his experience and his actions, put it in this coherent framework that he could then understand in a new way. A lot of veterans do that.
He calls his book American Sniper. A year later, it's on the New York Times bestseller list, selling over 1.5 million copies. Chris Kyle, Navy SEAL, is transformed into a multi-million-dollar business and appears on front pages and talk shows.
And with that success came cameras and microphones and interviews and sound bites.
With celebrity comes a dark side. Every part of his life will be scrutinized, and soon key parts of his story will be questioned. One particular passage in Kyle's book causes a sensation. It describes an incident in a Californian bar during a wake for a fallen comrade.
In the book, Chris Kyle describes an individual that he refers to as quote-unquote scruff face. And in Chris's telling of the story, this individual, scruff face, comes up and speaking negatively about the war.
Scruff started running his mouth about the war. I let him out.
It's a very self-serving, one-sided story of a bar fight, which you could probably hear Sunday mornings anywhere in the world.
The story might have gone nowhere if Kyle hadn't claimed on a radio show that Scruffface was none other than former pro wrestler and Minnesota governor Jesse Ventura.
And all of a sudden, the political and internet world just blew up.
Governor Ventura says he was with people that night and there was no fight.
Jesse Ventura said he never even met Chris Kyle.
Ventura sues for defamation. Kyle loses, and Ventura is awarded a total of $1.8 million.
What the governor always wanted was a jury verdict that says Chris Kyle's story is a lie.
In 2016, the decision to pay Ventura the huge sum of money is reversed, and Governor Ventura is given the option of taking the defamation case back to court. But at the time of the original verdict, people start wondering, if this isn't true, what other Chris Kyle stories may not be true?
Chris was suddenly placed in this situation of people questioning whether he was this sort of honest, straightforward Texan or some kind of fabricator or basically a liar.
As doubts grow about Kyle, focus turns towards another story that appears not in his book, but a magazine.
Another tale that Chris apparently told was of a carjacking in Texas.
Chris had pulled up to a gas station and was filling up his car when, according to Chris, two guys walked up.
They have pistols and pull the pistols on him and want his truck.
The magazine article says Kyle tells the robbers that he needs to reach into his pickup to get the keys. In fact, he's going for his gun. Both robbers are shot dead. It's a sensational tale. After the story breaks, journalist Nicholas Schmidl investigates. He calls all the different county sheriff's departments along the stretch of highway where the carjacking was alleged to have happened.
Spoke to the sheriffs in each of those jurisdictions, and all of them said, didn't happen under my watch, didn't happen under my watch.
There's no bodies. No coroner was called. Nothing.
And Schmidl comes across something else that is puzzling. According to Kyle, he waits for the police, and when they arrive, he refers them to the Department of Defense. It vouches for him as a war hero, so the police send Kyle on his way, with no charges. Schmidl thinks this doesn't ring true, and speaks to Special Forces operators.
And someone from one of those teams said, look, he said, the notion that Chris Kyle, a Navy SEAL no longer in service, driving a private vehicle, who's just committed double murder and is now going to be waived of any responsibility because of his prior affiliation or because of his kill count is absurd, to say the least.
In other words, the carjacking story appears to be a complete fabrication. There will be one more extraordinary Kyle tale that people question. It's alleged that Kyle tells another story to a group of friends about killing 30 looters in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. In fact, whether he actually told this tale is in doubt. But even excluding Katrina, people start questioning Kyle's honesty. The carjacking story is definitely not true. And the Ventura story has been challenged. It begs the question, why might Kyle feel the need to make anything up? One possibility is that the man who made his name protecting Americans in Iraq needed to continue his legend as a civilian.
I think maybe he protected himself with a bit of extra bravado, and he almost, came to be playing a part. And there was also this sense of he was sort of, as a sniper, he'd been a dispenser of justice.
I think that he saw himself as such. He became that dispenser of justice in civilian garb.
With so much unease about Kyle's relationship with the truth, people start to question the heart of the legend. For instance, how many people did he actually kill? In his book, Kyle claims that the Navy credits him with 160 kills. But the Pentagon won't verify that figure. And many branches of the US military state they do not keep confirmed kill statistics.
That's not saying that Chris Kyle did not kill that many people. It's saying that there is no verification that Chris Kyle killed that many people.
His supporters suggest that Kyle's kill count could be even higher, maybe over 250. But whatever the figure, the problem is there is no corroboration. More recently, doubt has even been cast on the number of medals Kyle claimed he was awarded. The problem is there is so much uncertainty surrounding his stories that it leaves a huge question mark over who the real Chris Kyle is and what he really did. But before anyone can get to the truth, tragedy strikes. In 2013, Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield are planning to help a troubled young veteran. Despite the media storm Kyle's created, he remains committed to doing the thing he does best, helping others that have served. Kyle has been approached by the concerned mother of a former Marine called Eddie Ray Routh.
The woman approached Chris and she said, my son is back from Iraq and he's having a hard time. And Chris agreed to, talk to the kid and see if he could help him out.
The three men drive to a shooting range, giving Routh the chance to open up. But it becomes clear he's deeply disturbed.
He was diagnosed with PTSD. He started showing signs of schizophrenia. He was not in a good psychological state.
On the way to the shooting range, Kyle texts Littlefield, "This dude is straight up nuts." Littlefield responds, "Watch my six," military slang meaning, "watch my back."
They went to the gun range, and Chris Kyle laid out the guns they were going to shoot that day.
Kyle's plan is to help the young Marine to relax during the afternoon shooting and gradually get him talking. Then as Kyle and Littlefield move downrange, probably to change the targets,
to have him killed on his own soil, in his own state, in his own country, by a fellow service member from the same organization that he spent countless hours and hours protecting, is just beyond comprehension.
You know, it's a tragedy on every level. He's helping this kid who's in a really bad way, and it gets him killed.
I mean, there's a real tragic irony about Chris Kyle's death. Everybody expected that it was going to end with a bullet on the streets of Fallujah or Ramadi. But in fact, he paid the ultimate price in his home state of Texas.
Nine days later, a memorial service is held for Chris Kyle at the Cowboys Stadium in Dallas.
But Chris was much more than a patriotic serviceman, much more than a talented marksman, much more than an outstanding SEAL, and much, much more than just a person. He was a man, he was a myth, and he was a legend.
So is that the real Chris Kyle? The legend of Hollywood and his funeral? Or was he, in fact, far more complicated?
There are sort of rings of truth, and what a 2-hour film was able to capture, yeah, look, this is Chris Kyle here, sure. But the ripples of truth become so much more interesting and complex and dynamic the further you go out.
I want to see him for the good that he did, and I want to see him for the darker side of him, and I wish the film had showed that. I wish the film had the courage, the artistic courage, to really do a character study of this actual person and not do a propaganda piece about the legend.
As his invented stories and his more extreme writings show, Chris Kyle was more flawed than the legend would have us believe. But equally, he was a brave and heroic man, if very fallible, just like everyone.